name's John Bonham. I'm with Coal Fire Systems. We're going to talk today about PCI and what it means to you and to the business office at your what do you call yourselves? Departments, agencies, districts? Organizations. We'll go with that one. That's easy for everybody. We're going to talk about PCI and how that relates to you and your organizations. I'm a little clicker here. So we're going to talk a little bit about Coal Fire to start off with. Then we're going to talk about the business office. We're going to talk about the changes from PCI from 2.0 to 3.1. A little bit about EMV and point-to-point encryption. It says questions and answers, but to be honest with you, I'd rather just talk as we go through this. So if anything sparks a question that you need to talk about or have a question about, just ask. We'll stop then, we'll talk about it, we'll discuss it before we move on. If it's something I know we're going to cover pretty soon, I might push it off just a little bit, but we want to make sure that all your questions get answered today. And again, this is a discussion, it's not a lecture. So first, a little bit about Coal Fire. Coal Fire is the QSA, which stands for Qualified Security Assessor for the state of North Carolina. And we have the contract to do scans, to do penetration testing. You all should have access to a tool called NAVIS, which allows you to go in and fill out your self-assessment questionnaire. The state purchased one for each organization. If you need more to get a little deeper into the different ways that you process credit cards, you can buy additional SAQs or SAQ licenses to go through and fill that out. It's kind of like a TurboTax. Instead of filling out just one tax form, you can fill out as many as you need for the different sub-organizations. And then you can either roll it up into one or however you want to submit it to the state. Coal Fire does a lot of different things. We do PCI. We also work with HIPAA for healthcare information. We work with GLBA for financial information. We do FSMA, FedRAMP, FERPA for federal requirements. We do cloud information, all these different areas. Today we're going to talk specifically about PCI, but if you have any type of governance and compliance, IT specific, you can always come to us and we can help you out. We're not a vendor. We don't sell hardware. We don't sell software. We don't sell managed services. We don't manage firewalls, logging, monitoring, patch management, intrusion detection. We don't provide those services, but we help you audit those services. So we don't want to get that conflict of interest. We're just into audit, compliance, and advisory. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the business offices today. I know you're primarily IT. This is something that kind of should ring true with you, but again, if this is something you can share with the people back at the office. When people decided in your organization first decided to start taking credit cards, it wasn't because somebody from IT was standing there saying, we need to take credit cards because I need more work, I need something more to manage, to secure, to protect. There was somebody in the business office making a business decision on, we need to take this to make it easier for our customers, to make the accounting better, to reduce the number of return checks or canceled checks or non-sufficient checks. We need to do this for business reasons to make it easier. So somebody in the business office came up with this great idea to take credit cards. They signed some contracts with different vendors, with different processors, with an acquiring bank, and they became a merchant. When they did that, they signed up for what Visa's, the Visa, MasterCard, American Express, they all have the same type of language, and basically it says you are going to be PCI compliant at all times. If you take credit cards, if you take one credit card or 1 billion credit cards, you're going to be PCI compliant as you take these cards and protect the information that's been submitted to you. So just to kind of review here, it was a business office decision because of a business need that they had. Business solutions that they signed up for, business responsibilities that they, again, signed on that Visa contract that they're going to be responsible for. They're going to do that with the help of the IT department and with the help of the merchants and their staff. So really what this is all about is getting back to where the needs are, where the responsibilities are. Every 3 years, the PCI Council makes changes to the standards. And some people think that's too often, some people think it's not often enough. They just switched from 3.0 to 3.1, so they gave you about 6 months that you were actually in a static one. But the reason they do that is because there's changes to the types of technology, both from the attack portions as well as from the delivery portions. And if you look at the screen behind me here, you'll see that there's a risk pyramid, and it's upside down. So down here at the bottom, there's very little risk, and at the top, there's more risk. And along with that risk comes responsibilities, controls that need to be put into place and managed to be able to account for that risk or protect your customers. You'll notice as you go up here, you start at the bottom with 14 questions, and at the top you're almost at 350 questions on the self-assessment questionnaire. And that's just not a question that says, oh, I have to answer yes or no 350 times. That's 350 actions that you have to examine and be able to provide evidence and proof that you're actually doing what that question is asking you. So it's not just 350 questions, okay, I'm going to spend 4 hours doing this. It's all the things that go behind those questions for you to be able to answer it yes truthfully. You'll notice on the right-hand side we have ASV scans and penetration testing. As you implement different methods of taking cards, you may be required to do scanning of your networks, of your external and internal IP addresses, and then also do penetration testing of those same services. So again, as you go up, you're adding more responsibilities and potentially more cost, because even though the state is paying for the scans, they don't pay for the penetration testing. Those are still requirements under the PCI. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the different types of self-assessment questionnaires and what they represent. Because I want you to think about when you go into these meetings, I had somebody in the hallway, I've talked to 6 people since I've been here, and I've had 2 of them ask me questions about, we're thinking about changing or we're in the process of changing the way we accept cards. When you're making those changes, that's a good time to sit down and say, why are we going to do it this way? What business need does it make versus what risk and responsibilities does it add? These are all business decisions that need to be made. When I flew here, I had to reserve a plane, I had to reserve a car, and I had to reserve a hotel room. All 3 of those people store my credit card data. All 3 of those people are SAQDs. But they all have reasons why they have to, or for business reasons have to, hold my information, keep my information, store my information. If I wreck that car leaving, they want something to get some payment out of me. If I don't show up for a flight or don't show up for a hotel, and that room goes vacant or that seat goes vacant, they want something to charge. So they have a business reason to store the credit card information and are willing to pay those extra fees, take on those extra responsibilities for that business need. If I'm processing a card for a parking ticket, do I really need to store that credit card information, or can I just process the $25 and move on? And so again, business decisions need to be thought through all the way through. Also point out here, we see these stars. These are new self-assessment questionnaires that we didn't have before. The D's kind of been around, but it used to be combined with the service provider. Now they have a separate D for merchants and a separate D for service providers. And we'll talk about the other ones that as we go through. But these are new methods that have come up, and so they had to create new self-assessment questionnaires to deal with those. I'm going to basically start at the bottom here and work my way up. And we'll go through the different types, and then we'll go through the changes for from the 2.0 to the 3.1. Here's the chart, and it's very similar to the chart I just showed you, but it's just designed a little differently. This will be on the screen and back. They also have the actual presentation that I'm sure you can log in and download so you can read it a little easier. You don't have to memorize any of this, but this is a good chart to look at when you're thinking about changing from one method of taking payments to another method of taking payments. At the top here, we have the A. And again, it shows you how many questions, how many changes there were from the 2.0 to now the 3.1, and then if you're required to do scans, and if you're required to do penetration testing. So the additional requirements are all listed there. The first one we're going to talk about is A. This is for basically when you outsource the payment to somebody else. If somebody comes to your website and then you send them to Google or PayPal or some credit card processor, and when they're typing in their credit card information, they're nowhere near your site, they're totally on the other person's site. So all the information that they're typing in credit card related is going onto PayPal's site or your processor site. That's a Form A. It's the simplest one out there. There's 14 questions, and most of those questions are, did you get something from PayPal that showed that they were PCI compliant? Do you have, what do you do if somebody calls in? So it's very simple questions, but it's really about policies and procedures. It has nothing to do with IT. I actually had somebody from the state of North Carolina, I hope you're not in this room, call me up and they said, hey, I'm filling out this self-assessment questionnaire, and I gave it to my IT guy, and it came back and it was all not applicable. They said, well, if you filled it out correctly, all of them should be applicable. I said, let me pull it up. So I pulled them up online, and we started looking through it together, and I said, well, this is a Form A. I said, do you have this policy? He's like, no. I said, do you have this policy? He said, yes. I said, well, then, is this part of the IT function, or is this a part of the business function? He goes, well, it sounds like all these are my questions, and I should be answering these questions and not my IT guy. They were not applicable to him, but they are applicable to our organization. When you do this, again, it's all about policies and procedures. It's very simple, but it has nothing to do with IT because they're never processing, transmitting, storing credit card information through your network. It's all being done off-site through a different vendor. The next one is point-to-point encryption. This is one of the new ones. As you saw, it had the star next to it. The thing you need to keep in mind about point-to-point encryption, just real briefly, point-to-point encryption, you swipe the card, and as you're swiping the card, it's taking that information and encrypting it at the head or at the keypad. So as you're hitting those numbers, it's encrypting that information. Once that information is put into your system, it's totally encrypted, and it passes all the way through your network encryption. It goes to your processor, and they decrypt it. They have the key to decrypt the information. Nobody in your organization has the information or the key to decrypt the information. So it's considered not credit card information as it passes through your network. At the swipe head, is where it encrypts, and it doesn't decrypt until it's out of your hands, and you never get any of that credit card information back. You'll get a token or a confirmation number or something of that nature, but you're not going to get any credit card information. Because of that, they consider it very safe. You're not required to do any kind of scans. You're not required to do any type of penetration testing. There's only 35 questions, and again, it goes around policies and procedures. The thing you need to keep in mind about point-to-point encryption is that you need to go to the PCI website. The PCI website has a list of validated point-to-point encryption solutions. If it's not on the list, it's not point-to-point encryption. There's a lot of things called end-to-end encryption and things of that nature. Those are different methods. It's very similar, but it's not been approved by PCI to use this particular self-assessment questionnaire. There's other methods you can go through to basically achieve the same thing. That's something you want to talk to your acquiring bank about, and you might have to get a QSA like Coalfire involved to be able to review the methodology and write up a paper for the bank if that's the way you want to go. Any questions about that? The next one is the B. Everybody remembers the swipe terminals. Swipe it in, it just goes out through the telephone line. This is a B. It's very simple, 41 questions. There's no scans, there's no penetration testing involved with this. The thing that you have to remember is that this is the old B, the B that goes through the copper telephone lines, the analog telephone lines, not the voice over internet. That's a different one. That's one of the new ones. The CVT. This is an interesting one, and this was added the last go-round. When we went from the 1.2 to the 2.0, they added in the CVT. And this is a virtual terminal where you're typing on your computer, you're actually typing on somebody else's network. So the information is being typed onto somebody else's network through the internet. This is the virtual terminal. I don't see these very often, but again, it's used common enough that they have their own self-assessment questionnaire. Again, there's no scans or penetration testing required for the virtual terminal. So we have the BIP, we just talked about the B with the swipe terminal. This is basically the same exact thing, but over voice over internet protocol. It goes from 41 questions to 83 questions. So there's a lot more you have to think about because now that information is traveling through your network. There's no penetration testing required, but they do have the scans.
I have a question.
Yes.
So let me give you a scenario. I work for the Department of Agriculture right now. We have a state fair going on. At the gates, we're taking credit cards for ticket admission sales. But the traffic is traversing our network, but it's going to the ticket handler's website. And they're processing the payment there. Would we qualify for that?
The BIP?
SAQ?
Yeah.
Because I can never, when Trustwave was at the contract, and I talked to them about it, they had me doing I had 2 or 3 different stories, but I haven't really talked to Coldfire yet about.
Well, I can tell you this, since you're sending them to that kiosk or that terminal to process a card, that is in scope. So whatever goes through there is in scope for PCI. How it gets from there to your processor will also determine what's in scope for PCI. If it's under point-to-point encryption or not under point-to-point encryption, is it through cellular? How does it get from A to Z to be processed? Will determine what self-assessment questionnaire you need to fill out. But because you're sending people to a kiosk or to a machine to process cards, and it's going somehow through your network, it is in scope for PCI, and it is something that you're going to have to.
Oh, we know we're going to fill out self-assessment questionnaire. We're confused on which one, if we should do the D, which I think we'll get to, or this one now. Can you explain kind of what we're doing?
Yeah. Well, what we'll ask, if you haven't been to NAVIS first, the first thing it's going to do is the environmental section. And the environmental section is going to say, what are you doing and how are you doing it? And as you go through and fill out those questions, it's going to either add additional questions or take away questions based on the way you're answering as you go through. So if you answer it all truthfully, it's going to, at the very end, tell you, this is what you need to fill out. A, B, C, D, CBT, BIP, whichever one it is. And then it's going to list not only those requirements, but those questions within the requirements that are applicable to you. You really shouldn't have that many that are listed as not applicable, because the tool takes all those that are not applicable out, and they're not even presented to you as questions. So I'd say go through that first, and if you're comfortable with it, and then you say, this makes sense, then just go ahead and fill it out. If you go through it and you say, I don't agree with this, or I don't understand this, then give me a call, and we can talk about, like I did with that guy that said they're all not applicable. We'll look at it, and we'll try to understand if maybe you filled something out in the environment wrong, or you're just not wanting to accept reality.
And that might be it, because I went through the schedule of the SQD last year, I think it was, and it's pain.
Yeah. Well, if you found yourself putting not applicable for a lot of the questions on the D, it might have been the wrong one.
Well, and it was me filling out from my D, not with the auditor or the controller and everybody.
Just to let everybody know, and I'm not trying to sell our products and services here. You've already signed up, or the state's already signed up to use our SAQs. If you want more, you can sign up for additional licenses. We also have QSAs on staff that you can hire to walk you through. Hold your hand as you go through the entire SAQ. And we do universities, we do cities, and what we typically end up finding is they might have 20 or 30 different merchant IDs, and of those, only 1 or 2 are C's and D's, maybe 3 or 4, and those are the ones they really need help with. The A's, where they're filling out 14 questions, they don't need anybody to help with those. So the first year, they'll hire us to come through and hold their hand for those 3 or 4. The next year, we might do some additional testing or something like that. But it's more of a process until you're comfortable with what you're doing and how you're doing it and the answers. And then making changes, because you might say, hey, we could do this a whole lot different, get the same results without the same responsibilities or risk.
And if we take credit cards in various ways, like you mentioned, the analog point of sale license, if we take it that way and also the way I described, we have to fill out more than one
processors are required to fill out one for the entire organization,
Okay.
okay? That being said, there's always it depends. If you're processing through two different processors, you may be required to fill out more than one. We work with a lot of convenience store chains. Convenience store chains, believe it or not, they might have 7 stores that are Exxon, 3 stores that are Shell, 4 stores that are BP, 7 that are Marathon. They process cards through those flags that they fly, so they need to fill out multiple self-assessment questionnaires, one for each of the different processors that they use. So if you have multiple processors that you're using, you might need to fill out different self-assessment questionnaires for those multiple processors. But in theory, if you process all through one merchant acquiring bank, you can just fill out one. That being said, you need to understand how you're processing cards and make sure that you answer all the questions. I'll use a university as an example. The University of Colorado has 4 campuses. Each campus has parking, each campus has housing, each campus has administration, admissions, cafeterias, bookstores. They can realistically fill out one self-assessment questionnaire for all those campuses, or they can fill out one per campus, or they can fill out 100 per campus, because there's about 150 merchant IDs per campus. The thing that you have to be aware of is when you're filling out a self-assessment questionnaire, if anything is the answer no, the answer is no for every single entity that is submitting. So if I have a campus of 100 merchant IDs and 99 of them are compliant and 1 of them isn't, for that particular question I would answer it no. Because as a campus, I can't answer yes for every single entity. So when you're talking about larger organizations, diverse organizations, you can fill them out. But like I told the guy at the University of Oklahoma, that guy that's in the basement of the stadium taking mail with a credit card number to reserve parking spots for the motorhomes, for those 27 spots for your mega boosters, you have to answer the same questions for that kid that you do for the housing or the admissions that's taking 50,000 credit cards at a time for people trying to get admitted into the school. You have to look at every single method for every single entity to be able to answer that question yes. So a lot of times it makes more sense to break them up into smaller ones so that you can look at them more minutely and say this is the nuts and bolts of how we're actually doing this, versus standing at that top level and saying I'm going to be able to answer for every single entity in my sub-organizations as I go through this. I mean, I go through these all the time. I was talking to a university here in North Carolina, and they take credit cards for summer camp, and they take that piece of paper and they stick it in a file cabinet in some lady's office and keep it for a few years. And so the person that's the bursar who was over that project had no clue that there's a file cabinet full of credit card information sitting in some lady's office down the hall. Until you can answer definitively yes for everybody, you really should break it down to the smallest common denominators. That being said, the first thing I try to do once I get an understanding of all those different ones is saying, how many can I put back together? I have 47 that process through PayPal. We're going to do one self-assessment questionnaire, plus 47 merchant IDs, and we're done. So you want to make sure you get all the information, but you don't need to fill out one for everybody. You can't fill out one for the entire organization, but you need to make sure that every single sub-organization is covered in those answers. Does that make sense? Great. PAP is VoIP. You do need to do scans for that. The AEP, this is, the very first one we did was the A, and that's when you type the information, you're typing it on somebody else's network. If you have credit card information that they're typing into your network, and then is being sent to your processor, that means that credit card information is being stored, processed, or transmitted through your network, and it becomes part of your network. In that case, it goes to 139 questions instead of the 14. You have to do scans, you have to do penetration testing. So before you say, hey, we got this cool intern and he knows all about programming and he can write this cool thing for us to do this cool thing for us, just realize that with all that coolness comes additional responsibilities, additional risk.
So on that one, that's strictly third-party websites.
The A.
AEP.
AEP means it's going through your website to somebody else's website. Where is the information being typed? When they are typing that information, are they typing it into your network or onto somebody else's network. When does that redirect take place? Does it take place before they start typing their credit card information or after? That's the difference between an A and AEP. And again, there's no electronic storage of cardholder data. It's just being processed, transmitting through your network. The next one is the C. The C's been around for a long time. They did add an additional 59 questions to it. A lot of this has to do with, and I'll get into this a little bit later, continual recognition of being compliant versus just being compliant at the time you sign the form. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The last one is the D for merchants. This is basically everything else. If you store credit card data, this is a must, and then there's a lot of other different tangibles, but basically everything that is left over gets funneled to a D. The D can have over, close to 350. Again, the tool will determine for you which questions are applicable, which ones are not. I think the last D I filled out with somebody, there was like 62 questions that got pulled out before they even were presented to the customer. Service providers. Most of you are not service providers unless you're doing it by accident. And what I mean by that is if you are processing credit cards for somebody else, you can be a service provider. If you're working at the fair and somebody says, hey, you're selling tickets to the fair, you could also do this for me and then give me the money, you're a service provider. You have additional questions that you're responsible for. And this is the same chart, just to kind of pull it all back together. And again, the point of this is, as you make changes to the way you process cards, when you're making those decisions, think about beyond what the salesperson is telling you. Think about what you want to be liable for, what you want to be responsible for, the risk that's involved, and do you have the people and manpower to maintain those systems in a compliant manner? Everybody thinks PCI and all this responsibility that's been pushed on you, but when you go out to dinner on Friday night or tonight or wherever and you hand somebody your credit card, you expect them to protect that information. You don't expect to get a call that says, hey, your credit card information was stolen. When people give you their credit cards, they expect the same exact thing. It's just a matter of being responsible for the information that's given to you. All right. Any questions on the different types of SAQs before I move into the changes? All right. So, the 3.1, the goals for the 3.1 are really the same goals that they have been, which is being compliant all the time. PCI has been evolving and they've been adding questions, they've been adding different things. When I look back to the 1.2 or the 1.0 and I look at the 3.0, they're really not that much different. They're just asking the questions in a different way because people are becoming more sophisticated and understanding. At the beginning, they just wanted you to have some awareness that you need to protect the information. I remember working with a large convenience store chain, multinational, Canada, the United States, all over. And I had them on the phone and I said, what is your cardholder data environment? What is your CDE? They said, well, for each store we have 2 registers and a computer in the back. I said, okay, so your cardholder data environment is 2 registers and a computer in the back. And they said, yes. I said, okay, that's great. I said, who has access to that information? They said, well, the accounting department, they go in at night and they can pull all the reports for all the transactions during the day. So I said, well, so your accounting department has access to that credit card data in that register? And they said, yeah. So now your accounting department is also in scope for PCI. I said, anybody else? They said, well, every night they update the prices for all the different things in the store based on the prices we're buying them at, and if there's any kind of specials or any kind of sales that are going on, buy a cup of coffee, get a free donut. They put all those into the register so when they, the next day, those automatically show up. So your marketing department also has access to the registers. They said, yeah, it does. I said, well, who has access to the marketing department? They said, well, there's nothing secure in marketing. Everybody can get into the marketing department. So when you start following the trail, they had a completely flat network. Everybody in the store, everybody that worked for the company had access to everything in the registers if they knew the right path to get there. So what they just started, the first couple of years, it was just getting people aware of what was there. The same thing was true with, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you running quarterly scans? Well, if the guy ran it yesterday, he'd say, yes, I'm running quarterly scans. Now they ask, did you run them the last 4 quarters? Did you have them compliant the last 4 quarters? They're trying to get people to move towards being compliant all the time and being able to prove that they're compliant all the time. So that's where a lot of these new questions are coming from. Things that used to be best practices, pushing, getting people to slowly get a little deeper and deeper. Now we're getting to the point where people are expected to swim, and so that's why you're seeing these additional questions. It's not a lot of big changes, just making people be more responsibility for what they're already doing. I think that covers everything. All right, so the 3.1, scope and segmentation. Forever and ever and ever, PCI used to be about anything that's stored, processed, or transmitted credit card data was in scope for PCI. Again, connected to that marketing department, that accounting department. If it's connected to the cardholder data environment, it's also in scope for PCI. Now it's part of the definition, and they make sure that you're aware of that. The last one is, or the next new one is, anything that can impact the security of. If you have an access server that's controlling the access to the different departments, networks, physical access to data centers, and it's not inside of your CDE, it's not inside of your cardholder data environment, but that can control who has access or doesn't have access, that also becomes part of your cardholder data environment. It also becomes in scope for PCI because it can control who has access to that information, even though it's not part of that same data center. All right, penetration testing. You all work in what I call large diversified organizations. You don't have one building with everything in there. You have different departments, different agencies that work underneath you, take credit cards different ways, work off of different networks. As I mentioned with the flat network for that convenience store chain, what they want you to do is define where are the segments. Where have you defined this to be part of your cardholder data environment? This is to be in scope. Once you've defined that, one of the new requirements under the 3.1 is that you actually do testing of that through penetration testing. You have to check to see if I'm in this cardholder data environment, can I get out to marketing? Can I get out to accounting? If I'm in accounting, can I get into the cardholder data environment? If I'm in marketing or wherever, can I get into the cardholder data environment? So they want you to be able to test those boundaries that you've already identified or defined as being segmented off the PCI. All right. These two, I think they're kind of, I wouldn't say silly, but they're nice for you all. Basically, they've changed the word from web application firewall to automated technical solution that detects and prevents web-based attacks. Basically, they're saying you can use something that's not quote-unquote a firewall, the same way you would use a firewall using different technologies. The other thing is about password complexity. If they say you should have 8 characters with a capital and a lowercase and a number and a special character, and you say, well, my legacy system won't allow me to take special characters or won't allow me to take numbers. What they say is that you can go to a website and it'll tell you, based on what you can use, the length that you need to have to be the same level of security. It's kind of like when you did the lotto. If there's 30 questions, your odds are this. If there's 100 questions, your odds are that. They're basically saying you might need to increase the number of choices that you have to match right using the thing. So that way you don't have to change out your legacy system. You're just becoming the same level of security using what's available to you. So it's a change to the wording to basically say you can do what you're already doing. You just need to make sure you're at the same security level. It's a kind of pre-approved compensated control. All right. So logging events. How much time do I have? 25 minutes. Who knows about a company called Target? They had a breach a couple of Christmases ago or last Christmas or sometime like that. And basically they were breached and all their credit card information was compromised. The way this happened was one of the stores had an air conditioning vendor who was very technologically savvy, and he said, if we can plug our computer, our AC system into the internet, we can manage those from our office. We can see when things are breaking down, when things need service. We can, basically monitor it from our office. And then if something happens, we can be out here right away. If we see something that's going to happen, we can come out here and fix it before it breaks down. And it's going to be a great deal for Target because we're going to be on top of this for you. Somebody said, that's a great idea. Let's plug you in here, right into our cardholder data environment, and you guys can have access to the internet through our system because this goes out to the internet. That's how we process cards back to our home office. I don't think they actually thought through that they're plugging into the cardholder data environment, but they did. There was logs that said, hey, somebody just plugged into your cardholder data environment. Nobody saw it. They get millions and millions of logs every day. It passed through and nobody caught it. Day after day, nobody caught it. Nobody did anything about it. Long story short, somebody hacked into the air conditioning vendor from Eastern Europe. And they said, hey, what can we find here? And they started poking around, fiddling around. Next thing you know, they're into this Target store. They find out from this Target store, I can get to all the Target stores, or actually to the data center, and I can get all the credit cards from all the stores just through this air conditioning vendor. So that's what they did. They just siphoned off cards. It wasn't very long before they said, hey, here's our common point of contact, it's Target. So Target got breached. The thing is about the logs, they had the login in place. They had the monitoring in place. It just didn't follow through on the plan to actively review those logs and react to them accordingly. So anything that's part of that cardholder data environment that stores, processes, or transmits credit card data is considered critical. Any logs that are on there need to be reviewed at least daily, if not more often. Anything that's outside of there in the peripheral, the marketing department, the accounting department, those need to be reviewed on a regular basis in line with the risk management program that you have for your organization. So, just to finish off that story, the CEO lost his job because they weren't logging and monitoring correctly. The CIO lost his job, and I'm sure that guy that plugged into the network lost his job as well. All right, if you do have any on-site, in-house, or direct contracted type of work, people come in and do programming for you, and any of that program has to do with sensitive information, credit card data, and I would probably expand that to include personal information of your employees or your citizens, any type of health information, financial information, personal information, social security information. Those people should be trained appropriately for dealing with sensitive information and storing that information in a secure manner. All right. We've always asked for data flow diagrams, payment flow diagrams. PCI has always required a network diagram. Now they require both a network diagram and a data flow or payment flow diagram as part of the PCI requirement 1.1.3. That's one of the new requirements. 2.4, you should have an inventory of all the hardware, software, facilities, vendors that make up your cardholder data environment. It's a good idea to have it anyways. Again, it's always been kind of one of our best practices. 5.1.2 has to do with malware. It used to be that people would say, oh, this is a Unix system, it's not susceptible to any type of malware, so we don't have to run antivirus on this system, and things of that nature. Basically what they've come up with, it says, if there's no way that somebody can access it through the internet, you probably don't have to have antivirus on it. If it can be accessed through the internet, no matter what type of services are being run on it, no matter what type of operating system it is, you need to run the appropriate malware on it. That's what it boils down to. There's been a lot of back and forth. That's just the way they settled it. It's kind of across the board. 8.1.3. This has to do with when employees leave, either because you moved them out or because they left on their own. There needs to be a process in place where as soon as they are let go, that the access to both the physical and to the network are removed. They no longer have access to those environments. A lot of the things that you see that go on with credit cards have to do with disgruntled employees. All right, 8.6. This has to do with the dual authentication. If you have key fobs or some sort of mechanical device to help you get into your computer, you need to make sure that those are secure and you have policies and procedures for that. 9.3, this is the opposite of letting people go. This is when you hire people. When you hire people, the access to your network, the access to your physical information systems should be deny all. We have a new person, we're going to deny all, and then we're going to say, what do they need to have access to? And then we're going to specifically give them access to those things that they need to do their job. We're not going to say, well, they have this job, and so we'll just give them access to all these things. We want to be very specific and very deliberate about what they do have access to. It protects you, and really it protects them. I don't want to be singled out or be a suspect in something that I had nothing to do with. So if I didn't have any need to be there, I'd rather not be there because it takes that suspicion away from me if something were to happen. 12.8.5. This is what I call Part A to a two-part requirement, 12.9, 12.8.5. 12.8.5 says you need to do what I call a responsibility matrix. And we were talking, he and I earlier about figuring out which SAQ is applicable, and then within that SAQ, which controls are applicable to you. So if I'm going to fill out an A, B, C, D, whatever it is, I'm going to have a certain number of controls that I'm responsible for when I do this. It might be 14, it might be 350, or something in between. But once we fill out our self-assessment questionnaire, we're going to know which controls are applicable to the way that we process cards. And we should have a matrix that says 1.1.1, 1.1.2. These are the different control numbers. These are what those controls mean. And this is who's responsible. It might be you. It might be some, you might say our organization, vendor. But you might even get down to the business office, the database administrator, the network administrator. You can get more defined, based on what you want to do there. And then for your vendors, you're going to want to be very specific and not just say vendor. You're going to want to say it's Omega ATC is doing our patch management. This company is doing our firewall management. Be very specific about the names. And then there might be some that you share responsibility. So you need to clearly define who's responsible for each of those controls. If there's a breach, they want to see that list and say, this is the control that caused the breach, the logging and the monitoring. Who's responsible for the logging and the monitoring? It's going to clearly define who is responsible for that breach. We'll get to 12.9 real quick. Let's see. I'll just jump to the end. 12.9 says you need to have in writing from those vendors what they're responsible for. So if you say, I've identified Omega ATC for these 7 different things that they're going to be responsible for, you should have something in writing from Omega ATC that says we're responsible for these 7 controls for your organization. That's 12.9. I'll get to that in a second. 6.5 has to do with broken authentication. If there's a break in the logs, you need to be able to identify that and have policies and procedures around that. If you use vendors that manage a lot of different customers, you need to make sure that they have a separate sign-on, login, unique username and password for your organization, so they're not just commingling your information and all their customers' information. 9.9 is going to be important to all of you. This is physical inspections. We talked about the B, which is the swipe terminal, the most simplistic way there. 9.9 is part of B, of those 41 questions. And it has to do with actually inspecting the equipment. If today I walk in and I got a black box with a black thing in the side and a blue connector here and a white connector here, and tomorrow I walk in and this is green and this is red and this is purple and I'm looking at a blue box, something's changed. It might be that somebody came in and changed out all the hardware and software overnight because you guys were making a change. It might be somebody came in and decided to siphon off some information, and the easiest way to do it was to change it out with something that was theirs and did what they wanted it to do instead of what we decided to do. So there needs to be some physical inspection of the devices used to process cards on a regular basis, and you should have some information about that. So some reports that you can run to say this is when it was last inspected. A lot of it has to do with, you can take pictures of it and actually supply those pictures. 11.3, we talked about earlier, this is the segmentation boundary testing as part of the penetration testing. 12.9 is where you have it in writing from the vendor that this is what that they're going to be responsible for that. Do we have any questions? Yes.
John, 3.1 took effect in June, July?
3.1 has been over a year. After January 1st this year, you could no longer submit. Last year you could submit using 3.0 or 2.0. January 1st of this year, you had to submit a 3.0 acceptance. There were certain requirements, and it's the ones here with the circles, these 5 requirements, that didn't really come into effect until July. July 1st, up until July 1st, it was kind of optional. After July 1st, it was no longer optional. So all these are totally in effect and have been since July 1st. The ones that I showed you before, these here, these went into effect January 1st.
So if you say you submitted in June or May, you're done.
Yeah, you
If
didn't have to
it
have
takes effect in June, do you have a grace period or do you need?
Well, what happens is if you signed it in May, which is before the cutoff, and you didn't have 12.9, you didn't have that physical piece of paper in writing from your vendor, you're okay. After July 1st, if you sign your self-assessment questionnaire, then you need to have it. Now, in theory, you should be compliant at all times. So you should have this. Even though you're not going to sign your self-assessment questionnaire until next May, you should already have this in place. If you got breached today and they say, well, who's responsible for that? Let me see it in writing. You say, I don't have it. You're out of compliance. Any other questions?
What happens if you're out of compliance?
Then you're liable for the breach. I think it cost Target about $1 billion. A lot of people lost their jobs. There's never been a breach for somebody that's been compliant. I mean, they're following the policies and procedures. They have the hardware, software, segmentation, everything done correctly. I have 12 minutes. Does anybody want to run through EMV? Does everybody understand EMV? You can do whatever you want.
Go ahead.
EMV. EMV stands for Europay, MasterCard, Visa. I'm sure you've seen them. The little chips on your card. Nowadays they're asking you to stick it in the machine instead of swiping it through the machine. That's all about EMV. It has the chip technology. Chip technology basically prevents card fraud. 80% of the transactions that cause a breach or the information is done because of a card-present transaction. So I can get card information off the internet, I can buy it. When I checked into my hotel yesterday, they threw a card into the thing and programmed that swipe, that magnetic strip on the back, and that's how I get in and out of my room. They can use that same exact machine to put on credit card information, and I can swipe it at any store that takes a swipe card. I can go to a gas pump, I can go to any place that swipes a card, and it'll work. So the chip, they also have the RFD, which is you'll see that symbol there. That means you can tap it, and basically it has a chip inside that has a radio frequency that interacts with the machine. But either way, the thing that's interesting, different, cool, whatever you want to call it about these cards, when I swipe a card and on that magnetic stripe, that information is static. It doesn't change from swipe to swipe. And that's why I can buy it off the internet, put it on a card and run that card wherever I want, because the card information is always the same. The primary account number, the processor, the expiration date, my name information, all that's going to stay the same. And as long as I'm swiping that card and they haven't found it to be a bad card yet, I can keep using it. The card information actually takes the information and only is valid for one transaction. So the card information that I'm using this transaction is going to be different than the card information I'm using the next transaction, and the next transaction, and the next transaction. So it makes it impossible to duplicate that information or to hack into it. Really all you're protecting is the card. You're protecting the card and the card information because that card information cannot be used over and over. It takes special equipment to read the card. It takes the chip to be able to use the card. 80% of card present transaction or fraudulent cases are card present transaction. That's kind of what you need to know. What does that mean to you? October 15th, today's like the 21st or 22nd or something like this. So last week is when the actual liability shift took place. If you do not have an EMV machine for your customers to use, and they come in with an EMV card, you're liable for any of that loss, both in your store and any information after if you're breached. So back prior to October 15th, if somebody came in, they had a magnetic stripe only machine, you had a magnetic stripe reader, and it was a fraudulent card, I put my information on my hotel room key here, and I'm at your store, swiping through. You're not liable for that information or that because you're not required to know that that's a fraudulent data coming off of my card. The bank takes care of that. You're not liable for it. From today going forward, if you do not have that EMV chip reader, and I come into your store with an EMV chip card, you say, well, I don't have that kind of reader. You have to use the magnetic stripe. So I use that magnetic stripe. If the magnetic stripe information is stolen, you do not get any reprieve. If it was a $450 parking ticket or traffic ticket, if it was whatever people are paying for, you're liable for that loss. The credit card companies are not going to take that loss. Likewise, if I swipe that card and that information off of that stripe is in your machine and you're breached, and they take that information and go buy a jet ski and a plane ticket to Europe and all these different things, you're liable for that as well. So if you do not have the technology in the machine to read it, and I have the technology on the card, then you're liable. If you do have the technology, both the equipment and the process is set up with your processor, you basically switched over and your processors tested it, run through it, and you say, you're set up to take EMV cards now, and I come in with an EMV card, it goes back to the way it was before. You're no longer liable for that. So really the only liability as a merchant is, as far as EMV goes, is for when you swipe that card using the magnetic stripe because you do not have the technology to take the EMV chip. Now you're still required for all the other ways. It's really just about the fraudulent card that it takes that. If you're typing it in, if I call it in, if it's through the internet, all those areas have nothing to do with EMV. And so you still have to protect the rest of your network the same way as you are today. That's just an added security really for the banks to keep that credit card information from multiplying and being used in many different places fraudulently, yes.
So if somebody stole your credit card, they can still use it, even with the chip, right?
Well, if I have a chip on it, and I go into a store that has a chip reader, it's going to, a stolen
They won't
card.
know who was actually stuck in the card.
That's correct.
Because I read where, I don't know if it's Europe or somewhere, they actually use these, but they require a PIN as well. Will that make, are we going to move to that route?
We will. They think that Americans are too dumb. We use it for our ATM cards everywhere, so I don't know why they think we can't handle it for our credit cards. America, they said we're going to use what's called chip and signature. So you stick the card in, read the chip, and then you use your signature. Again, I think it's dumb. I don't see it staying around very long. I'd say probably the next 2 to 3 years would be chip and PIN as well. Which is a much more secure way of doing it, because then it's dual authentication, something you have, something you know. All right, the other thing that's big these days, and we talked a little bit about it, is the point-to-point encryption. Point-to-point encryption has the data encrypted at the swipe. So as you swipe the card, as you put that chip in and it's reading that chip, it's encrypting that data, and it protects that data all the way through your network. If you're going to buy the equipment for EMV, and you haven't already, you may want to buy the equipment that also encrypts at the swipe. The equipment can be used with many different softwares, so if you're using Bluefin, Freedom Pay, Element, whoever it is, you may be able to use that same device for whichever one of those softwares. Even if you're not paying to switch over the software to point-to-point encryption, I would hate for you to make that choice a year and a half from now and then have to go out and buy totally new equipment. So if you're going to buy new equipment, you might also want to invest in equipment that is enabled for swipe encryption, for point-to-point encryption. So that's just another thing. Double down, make the most of the use. Again, today's all about making good business decisions, understanding what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. Does that meet the business needs that we have as an organization?
Sorry, I got another question about that. The companies, like I know, local pizza joint near the office, they don't know anything about this, but they got their new terminal, they still don't know why, they didn't have a clue. Do they get charged more by, do they have to pay them because they're not using the chip piece or not? I heard that may be the case, but I wasn't sure.
I'm not an acquiring bank. I really don't know what the different fees are, and those are all negotiable, so. Whatever deals they have, just like your deals are different because you go through the state has negotiated a contract. Every single vendor really negotiates their own contract. A lot of different
Some things are getting the word out a little better than others.
And a lot of the small mom and pops, they're serviced through sub-processors. So you have, it goes from here to a processor, then to the acquiring bank, whereas yours probably goes directly to the acquiring bank, unless it's somebody that's actually a service provider taking the credit cards on your behalf. So as a final thing, 70% of the U.S. cards and 41% of the debit cards should have the EMV chip by the end of the year. I know I walked in one day and I had like 6 pieces of mail and they were all new chip cards, even though my other ones hadn't expired. Just happened all at once, it seemed like. The demand for new equipment will increase as the deadline gets closer. Many that order late will be waiting on equipment. I know that I talked to somebody from Heartland Payments last week when I was speaking at a different conference out in Reno. And I said, what's your backlog on equipment? And she said, well, we have the equipment, but it also has to be programmed. It has to be identified with that store. And so there is a backlog of so many weeks because of that. I know other people are waiting on equipment to come in. So if you haven't already ordered and you order today, don't expect to get it tomorrow. And don't expect just to plug it in and have it work, because it won't. You need to do some testing. It needs to run through a process. You need to have it sign up for that service. Once you do that, you can go ahead and do that. All right, I have 1 minute. Do you have any questions? I appreciate all your time today, and I have some business cards up here if you want to contact me later if you have any questions. I have these